Well, welcome to another edition of Fork in the Road. It's grand final week, always one of my favourite times of year. And who better to sit down with and discuss everything about his journey and grand final week. Just a lazy 5-day and 5-night. Now, Derm, I've always wondered, when we played, how is it that night grand finals at the time, we didn't really count them, but now when we put them on a resume, it's 5-day and 5-night.
Hi, Corey. Yeah, when we play now, they don't mean anything. But back in the day, up until Roosie decided he was going to use them as half-cast scratch matches,
Yeah.
we as a club like Hawthorn, we would, have a year financially, to keep the club afloat. You might turn a profit of 50,000. The night grand final was worth 180,000 to 250,000. So it was the difference between being in the red or being in the black. So teams eagerly contested them in the 80s. So back then they carry a bit more weight. Yeah. These days they get tossed out with Roosie's treatment of them, where he used to play blokes who never ever put on another Sydney Swans jersey. In fact, I reckon Roosie played blokes he didn't even let train with his senior group.
But also, do you think it would also at Hawthorn, and I sort of think of Manchester United and Sir Alex Ferguson, that any piece of silverware Sir Alex would want to go out and win. Was it that case at Hawthorn as well, that you just looked at it, it was another piece of silverware that's on offer, so hey, we're going to go and win it?
Yeah, that's a good description, mate. The Hawthorn club always were of the opinion, if it's worth pulling your boots on, it's worth winning. So if you could get off your jacksie and you would be bothered to get out there and have a go at it, it was worth having a win.
Yeah. And then you walk into Hawthorn with the names and personalities of Hawthorn. How does a young kid from Frankston walk in on the scene with the likes of Lee Matthews and all these massive names at Hawthorn? What was it like walking in the front door at that stage?
Hawthorn were a little different to some other clubs. Like, I know Hawthorn have always been fairly frugal, and I'm not going to try and demean our neighbours, which was St Kilda, because had I been born 400 metres away, I'd have been a St Kilda player. And my parents, as a kid, they would, buy a block of land, build a house, and then about 3 years later, we'd do the same. And so we were always moving. I think I was even in St Kilda zone for about 18 months at one stage while we were renting, waiting for to move into the next place. St Kilda used to send taxis for kids who never even made it, from St Kilda to Frankston. And that journey now is a $70 cab fare. So back in the days, it was quite substantial to send out taxis to, 20 boys 2 nights or 3 nights a week who never even went on and played. It was, a loss of money. I didn't think it was all that frugal. Hawthorn never did that. Even though they were successful, they made players share lifts to training. And the great Kelvin Moore, who's a life member of the league and played 300 games, I played under 19s at 15. So from 16 years of age and onwards, I used to share a lift with Kelvin Moore until I could drive myself. So you'd be in the car with a league legend at 16 and you'd be chatting about life. And it's sort of that time in the car, an hour each way, 3 nights a week, and then the game on Saturday, it would take away the mystique of what a legendary player was. And, I'm not allowed to talk to that person. Although Lee Matthews, we always gave him a wide berth. He was Lee Matthews. He was in a league of his own, So, Peter Knights, Michael Tuck, Kelvin Moore, Al Martello, Don Scott. He was another one who was a little unusual. We used to give him a wide berth too. These were all legendary household names in Australian rules sport, especially at the Hawthorn Football Club. So it took away that mystique, so it wasn't too bad. And then by the time I'm 18, rather nervously, Kelvin Moore was sharing a lift with me. So, we returned the favour. But that was the difference between the two clubs.
It's amazing when you say it like that, Derm, that such a small difference would make an unbelievable amount to your development in football. Like you said, to be able to spend time in the car, not only to break down the barriers and be comfortable at training, that you can have that bit of banter and walk up to people, but to have a legend in the car just for an hour to and from training and be able to bounce ideas, and if something happened at training, to be able to bounce it off him would have been invaluable.
Yeah, most of the time Kelvin and I were singing songs and telling jokes and the likes, but there was, moments where I would pick his brain and ask him, what don't you like playing on? What do you feel most uncomfortable with? So, yeah, but you're dead right. It was a breaking down of that barrier. So I look back at that now and think I was pretty fortunate. I actually thought at the start, look, if I don't make it, I always thought I was a shot. But if I don't make it, at least I can go back and tell my mates, hey, I jogged laps next to Lee Matthews. Kelvin Moore used to give me a lift to training. I thought I'd have some stories to tell all my mates. So, at least I had that as a backup plan B.
Yeah, it was a pretty good plan B. But then you make your debut in a final. How significant was that? Because I don't know if you remember, from personal experience, I played the 125th anniversary game for North Melbourne, and I got a feeling that you were wrestling with Mick Martin in that game before the game started. But I know that from a personal point of view, when I look back, because I played well that night, I always in my brain went, I can play well in front of 76,000 people. I was be able to use that moving forward. Now, in your case, you come in your first game as a final, and then you came on, you kicked 5 goals. Was that just a memory you could always draw back on and to be able to play well in those big games?
Yeah, you really processed that, Corey. You're too intelligent for this sport. You went through the processes of thinking about it, mate. I was young and dumb and from Frankston. I looked in the paper and saw my name. Alan Jeans called me on the Friday, and I was listed as interchange from and 5 names. And Alan Jeans called me on the Friday night before the Saturday and said, son, I think we can fit you in tomorrow. And I went, oh, yeah, beauty. I thought you might. I'm the only forward you got on the bench. And he just roared at me over the phone. But I just sort of thought, fantastic opportunity. It's a game of footy, and I'll do my absolute best. And even to this point in time, there you go, I haven't overly processed it. I still don't know what the crowd was. I assume it was, 40, 50,000. It was Hawthorn, North Melbourne.
Yep.
It was a final, a first semi-final, but I still don't know what the crowd was. So I didn't overly process it. It was more about I'm playing against Ross Henshaw and David Dench. How do I beat those guys? What do I do? So mine was very much inside the field. I didn't give much thought to the outside. And really, only roughly 200 games later did I start to get nervous and start to think about stuff. The first couple of 100 games, it was, is my body right? What can I do? What does my opponent do? How do I beat him? It was all about what's on the inside of the field. So, yeah, perhaps I was fortunate that I didn't overly think it. See, you're a golfer, Corey. That's the difference. You're a very good golfer. And I spoke to Mark McCormick, the great Mark McCormick, once. And I was allotted 30 minutes time to go and stay at his to meet him at his residence in Melbourne, where he was staying. And I asked him a range of questions, but the one that stuck out for me was, he said, the great golfers, the absolutely great golfers, are seriously intelligent or seriously dumb. They either get the information and it's overloaded, it gets in there and they get everything, wind direction, the gust, the roll of the green, the grain of the green, and they take everything into account and they play accordingly, and the greats can compute all that science. The dumb ones get handed a club and say, this is your club, hit it that way, and the rest will happen. I want you to aim at that. And they go, okay. And he mentioned Freddie Couples, I might add. And those blokes didn't process it. They just went, oh, right, no fear of failure. The really smart guys processed everything. So I'm tipping you were too smart to play league footy, Corey, but really good at golf.
But just from a mindset point of view, like just on that, like how would you approach going into games of football? Like I know you gave us a little bit of an insight about what you have to do with your opponent, but overall going into games, and in particular some of the bigger games you're playing in, what was your mindset going into those games?
First thing would be the abilities of my opponent. Back in those days, in my days, you probably could narrow it down to two. At a pinch, it might have been a third. Once you got into the third opponent, you knew you were probably not going to be stopped by the opposition. So you'd look at your number one opponent, what his strengths were. You'd take into account the way that we played, how I could utilise myself within the team, and still exploit my opponent's deficiencies. So that was probably the number one aspect. There's always hope before any game as well. I hope I go well. I hope I end up playing all right. But the number one thing for me was look at what I'm up against, the ability of my opponent, the conditions, and my own preparation, i.e. how fit I am, how prepared my body is. And after about game 15, what injuries am I carrying today? Yeah.
Do you reckon it obviously, when you describe it like that, did that suit you a hell of a lot more, that one-on-one mentality, rather than today's football that invariably the best defender doesn't play usually on the number one forward?
Yeah, I like that knowledge of knowing what you're up against. Having said that, I'd have loved to have got the number 3 for the backman. That would have been nice. But it also gave me, like, you guys, like your key forward size, 6'5.5", 6'6", that sort of thing. I'm 6'1.5", and I had some physical attributes which would, benefit me greatly. But given if it turned into a stop-start, ping it up in the air and bomb it down forward, at 6'1.5", even with really long arms, I couldn't expect to outmark, once a quarter in direct combat my much bigger opponent. I reckon of 211 league games, I probably played on an opponent smaller than me 4, 5, maybe 6 times. Everyone was bigger. So it was always a strategy and a knowledge of what my opponent does. How do I play him? Yeah.
And the biggest thing, what I think a lot of people don't understand about centre half forward was, or is, the ability to run. Now, what were you like in terms of the time trials and running at the club? Because I know even with Wayne Carey, it's the greatest thing that's often underestimated was his ability to run. And same with Jonathan Brown. Like, people don't understand what an engine it takes to play centre half forward.
I'm so glad you've asked that question. The key forwards of today, yeah, they still move around, but they drill run. They run to the centre circle. They're the last in the line, or the first in the line to get back, and it's a run back, and they might give a little lead from there, somewhere along that axis. For me, once again, at my size, I used to always train with the elite midfielders.
Yep.
In the running groups in summer. So the best way I can describe the power to, endurance ratio. Remember that, the tan track, 3.85 kilometres. I used to do that in 1350, and at the same time I could still bench press 350 pounds. So the balance between raw power and endurance was pretty good. So that's how I used to physically try and better my opponent. But having said that, if your teammates are pinging it up in the air and you're standing next to a bloke who's 6'5", and you just got to push and shove, you can push and shove all you like, and you might get the better of the push and shove, you're still not marking it because he still reaches over. And even these days, blokes like Harris Andrews, they're even longer and bigger again. I'd hate to be playing on him in a one-on-one.
Yeah, I know. Now, the one that I'm always fascinated by is the great Alan Jeans. What impact, what was the enormity of the impact that he made on your life?
Corey, if I look a little blurry-eyed, it's because I was up late writing an article for the Herald Sun. Yeah. And it was about grand final day and the impact that Alan Jeans had on us. In life, in football seasons, and especially on grand final days. His impact on us was enormous. He's probably the most moralistic man I've ever known. He was like a father who was hard on his kids. You know, he would rarely, if ever, praise you. And as I said, I played, I think, 189 games all up. I played for Hawthorn, most of them under Jeansy. He only ever said, "Well played, son. I admire you," twice. I reckon I played a couple more good ones than two. But that was the kind of person he was. And you loved him for the way he not only coached you, but fathered you. So when he was willing, when he asked you to do something, you implicitly trusted him that what he was asking you to do, no matter what it felt like at the time, was going to benefit you and the team. Yeah.
And that, the pre-game speech before the 89 grand final, did the words that came out, what Alan Jeans said, did that have a big impact on you in terms of what was about to happen? I know that because I've heard Dipper tell the story about the pre-game speech and paying a price, but it's just, we're even at the moment, I've seen the old footage of, I don't know whether you've ever seen it, of the coaches that have Alan Jeans, Barassi, Hafey, and they're all looking down the camera. Now, this is probably 20 years retired, Alan Jeans, and he's looking down the camera saying, I mean, the things that if you come to a game, there's a crossroad, and this is 20 years afterwards. What was it like hearing that speech on 89 grand final day?
Yeah, that speech actually came at half time. Yeah, the pre-game speech was pretty rousing too. I mean, it was a holistic coaching philosophy in those days. Jeans coached us to be a really forward momentum team. He coached us to honour the lead, you know, hit the short lead, but make sure you drill past and receive the handball. So the ball was always in motion, which just suited Dunstall and myself. We loved it because the ball was always coming in very quick. Other than that, there was a real emotional content to the way that Yabby coached match days. And he was so good at it, you probably felt he's got nowhere better to go to. But the 89 grand final at halftime, he found it. You know, this is a bloke who had an aneurysm the year before, less than 12 months before. And they weren't sure whether he was going to pull through or not. And you see that footage you're talking about where he says, you step up or you step down. That's at about 25% out of 100 compared to what he used to be like. He's the only man I've ever been scared of, but I knew he was not physically going to hurt me. Just the power in his voice was incredible. Just such a charismatic man. For a bald-headed, big-eared man with glasses on, he was so charismatic. Yeah, that day we thought he's a chance to actually die here on the spot at half time. It meant that much to him. And Dipper, I don't know if Dipper told you, but one of the things he said, you know, Dipper with his punctured lung, and he was playing on Neville Bruns, and Bruns started to get on top in the third quarter. And I remember Yabby looking at Dipper, And Yabby had this beautiful sense and way about him. And he turned to Dipper in front of the group and said, Dipper, keep running, son. You've stopped running. That boy's getting on top of you. Run, run, run. I've never seen anyone die of exhaustion out here yet. The big fella went close. There's all that air escaped out of his lung after it was punctured and came up around his throat and made him look like a bullfrog. Yeah, genes in that bit of footage. I'll be honest with you, Corey. I probably have watched it 12 times since it was made. I reckon I've cried 10 times when I've watched it. And the other 2 times I've probably fought back the tears. And I know it's with all due respect to his legacy, it's half rat power of what he used to be. But I cried just remembering his ability to motivate and you know, really look after us in a time of our lives that was, you know, when we were great and he was great. It reminds me of, besides seeing my kids born, it reminds me of the happiest time of my life.
Yeah. And I do remember one of the first times we ever met, Derm. It would have been...
Golf course?
No, it would have been, it was at the Oasis in North Melbourne. And I think Graham Gawn introduced us, and I reckon real early doors.
Yeah.
I still remember, here was I think it was my first or second year of football, but one of the first questions I asked you was about your ribs in the 89 grand final. Have you still got, I remember without being a weirdo, but have you still, I remember at the time, you still have a real...
Yeah, still got it. Yeah, they still stick out. They sort of knitted like that, so... and they protrude out the front. Yeah, still there. So, yeah, that's not going anywhere soon, mate. I thought the first time we met, that was the first time as you being a professional footballer. Yeah. The first time we met, I've got a feeling I was playing in a golf day at the Royal Melbourne, and you being a very good golfer, and there was this tallish kid of about 12, 13, 14, and he was following around our group. I was with Peter Senior. I forget who else I was with. And I'm a chopper, smack it, but I don't care if I don't hit the fairway. As long as it goes a long way, I'll reload. And I'm chopping it all over the place. And I think it was you. And there was a young kid about 12, 13, maybe 14. He was really tall. And his mate said, come on, let's go and watch such and such. And this young kid said, no, I want to watch Dermy. It's more fun watching a bloke lose so many balls.
No, I distinctly, you know what it was? It was the Bicentennial Classic at Royal Melbourne. How the hell you remember it? And I reckon I found your ball on the 7th fairway when you blocked it right in the trees. How the hell you remember that? Has been...
Corey, it's a curse. I mean, my mates, I still play cricket with my mates I went to primary school with, and I'm 56. And they'll say, oh, remember the day such and such? And I'll say, yeah. And you bought a Barney banana when we went to the shops that day. And they'll go, I did too. And they say, how do you remember that stuff? I said, I don't know. I can't remember where I was yesterday, but I remember stuff from 25, 30, 40 years ago, which has no relevance to anything. It's a curse.
Derm, I asked Lee Matthews the same question. What was the hard, you blokes are very good, or you did hit some people pretty hard in your career, but what was the hardest hit you ever received?
Oh, the hardest one I ever got was Johnny Worsfold. Woosha got me.
Oh, yeah.
In the goal square in Perth. I was just outside the goal square. I knew I was going to be lined up, and I thought, I've got to keep the ball alive. I can't push it over the points. And I turned as I looked up with the ball, and I thought, you know, that the millisecond, but you know it's coming. I thought, oh, it'll be here soon. Bang, got me. And I just went on to all fours. I thought, whatever you do, don't let him see that he's knocked you over. and you're lying on the ground. So I went onto all fours, and then the rest of the day, for what I played of it, I had a form of concussion. You know, when you stare at a light for 3, 4, 5 seconds, you get that blurby yellow orb right in the middle of your vision, and then the rest is lucid. That was me. I couldn't see straight ahead. It was like looking through a pipe, but it had glad wrap over it, but around the outsides was clear. So when the ball was coming, I kind of had to look fractionally off and hopefully mark it there. So hence to say I got about 2 touches for the rest of the day, but that was probably the hardest hit. Which one did Lee say?
It was an interstate game. There was a guy from South Australia who had a really
German surname, I think.
Really weird name. Yeah, you're right. And
yeah.
That was the one that really sticks in his memory.
Yeah. Well, I think if it's a bank account, I think Lee invested more than he had taken out. Yeah.
I think he's very much of that opinion that if you give it, you've got to prepare to cop one. Now, the Essendon Hawthorn rivalry, like what was it like during those times going into those games? They would nearly become bigger than football themselves, like just the amount of, you could actually really sense the hatred going into those games.
It was pretty brutal, the affairs then. Once again, you'd look at the game and you'd say, right, who's my opponent? I'll get Kevin Walsh to start with, whether he stays on me all day or not. The backup plan will be someone like Terry Danaher, maybe Billy Duckworth. And you'd work out how you're going to play them. And then in the back of your mind, I'd be thinking, right, protect yourself at all times. They'll be coming for you. They'll be taking shots at you. They'll try and do everything they can to knock you out. All right. And that made me feel kind of alive. What will I do? I've got to do something back to them. And you would go into a mode when you're out there and within the rules, well, most of the time, you'd just go hunting. You just look for blokes who were open, and you'd try and do the same to them what they would do to us. They were nastier than us to start with, and then blokes like Dipper, myself, Gary Ayres, just sort of took the fight back to them, and then it almost got like they thought, oh, we can be nastier than you guys, and then we thought the same. So it got pretty willing. I do know that even on state of origin games, you'd be rooming with someone that the league would never place a Hawthorn player and an Essendon player together in the same room. Back in the days when we used to share, you just wouldn't share them. They'd never mix. They'd never talk to each other. They'd talk to each other, but they wouldn't socialise together in those few hours of downtime. They just would not allow that to be. Get on very well with the guys now. I think they're fantastic blokes, but at the time, it was genuinely nasty.
This episode is brought to you by National Make Good Solutions, experts in taking your commercial property back to the day it was built at the end of your lease. It's very similar, Dermott. I've heard like even Gary Neville, and then you hear Jamie Carragher, and you've got that Liverpool-Manchester United rivalry. Apparently that was exactly the same as what happened with the England teams, that those teams weren't as good. Now, I'm not saying the Victorian teams, but it's interesting you should say that you got this bit of club rivalry, but yet you're getting thrown together for a common cause. Yeah,
it's I remember seeing, what was the name of the bloke from, he went from Celtic to Rangers, Mo Johnson, back in the 80s. He was a soccer player. No one goes from Celtic to Rangers, but Mo Johnson did. And that was not the end of his life, but no, he couldn't even go outdoors because the Rangers blokes didn't accept him. He was playing for money, and the Celtic blokes hated him as a traitor. Oh, I think he ended up moving country in the end. Yeah, it was nasty with the Essendon guys. Jeansy never had, never took sets on opposition teams. But when Kevin Sheedy asked a police person friend in 1984 to examine what we might have been sniffing before the game, it was just smelling salts and the likes. That was the biggest insult. As I said, Jeans was so morally sound. The biggest insult he could ever have to his character was have that type of scenario play out. So we even felt it from Jeans. He never actually said, not once did Alan Jeans ever said, go out there and do anything untoward. He would advise you if something was there to be had and it was within the rules, you could, pound your body into the opposition, but he never once said to do anything untoward. In fact, he used to tell us off for doing it. But he used to go to another level against Essendon as well. And so bitter became the rivalry, and it was instigated from what he intimates his character being questioned.
Yeah. Now, Dermott, I created a walk when I saw what would happen with the suicide toll during the pandemic, and I thought your words about Mad Jack Daw were amazing. I remember sent you a message at the time. I thought it was fantastic. But what do you do to look after yourself? Because I think people sometimes see heroic figures in our life and they just think that we're all big and tough and strong. But what do you do to make sure that it's after Dermott?
Yeah, I think it's really important. People say, a lot of people turn around to me and say, when are you going to grow up? I do play around a bit, and I have, I still play cricket with my mates. I go surfing. I've got a lot of recreations. I do stuff that makes me feel happy.
Yeah.
And I find that's very good for my soul. You're dead right, Corey. For the first time in my existence, now I'm not remarkably close friends, but I say I am friends with 3 people I know who've taken their life in the last 7 days. For the first time ever. Now, if that's a microcosm, if I'm a microcosm of the Victorian landscape, and I know 3 people who've taken their life within the last week, things aren't great out there. We can have all these issues in life about, pandemics and the likes, and they must be treated with caution, with care, and with love in some places as well. But clearly, we recognise now not enough is done in mental health and prevention of suicide. So, I think this will be an issue which will have a lasting effect. I think this pandemic has pulled the scab off, if I can use such a vulgar term, off, suicide, and allowed people to say, right, there's death going on. Some of these deaths shouldn't be happening. We need to reach out. We need to support and care for more.
100%. Now, I'm actually great mates with Jason McCartney and Peter Hughes, and I reckon we've actually shared a drink or 10 at the Sari Club over the journey. But
yeah,
I think for people out there that don't know, it is an amazing sliding doors moment, what happened with you, and then also it had tragic circumstances with someone that you knew. Yeah,
so do you remember the night before the Sari Club bombings, Corey? I remember there was myself, my teammates, Chris Whitman, Tony Hall, there was a couple of other Hawks boys in there. There would have been, I reckon I would have seen 15 guys from Melbourne, half a dozen guys from St Kilda, yourself, and probably a dozen guys from North Melbourne, Mick and the likes. We were all in the Sari Club the night before it got blown up. And having a whale of a time, having a hoot and all those things. So, fate sort of let us all have so much that night before that no one could really go out the next night. And we were travelling home. I was travelling home the next night. and there was a friend, a dear girl by the name of Carrie Kastner. She was an American girl. And we dropped her off at the front door and turned the corner, drove down the road, and was probably 1K away, maybe 1.5 Ks away. We'd gone around BMO Corner,
Yeah.
And we heard the boom. We didn't know what it was. We thought, oh, that's an exploding gas bottle or something like that. You know, Bali, unusual things happen. But it was like a sonic boom going through the streets. And we were inside like a maxi van, and sort of ducked and went, gee, that's loud. And heard another one, not quite as loud thereafter. And we had no idea. Got to the airport and then checked in. And then in the next 30, 45 minutes, people started coming in just with the luggage they were holding, and said, well, we're getting out, that's a bomb. And we're like, no, come on, don't be serious, this is Bali. That poor girl, Carrie Kastner, yeah, she lost her life. One of two Americans who lost their life there. Yeah, so that hit home pretty bad. So we, the guys I was with, we put together the last 24 hours and knew what Carrie had been up to. And we all went out one day and went for a drive to a beach and put together her last 24 hours and how happy she was. And eventually sent it to her parents. And yeah, they were from Kentucky. So yeah, those sliding door moments, it's yeah, making me a bit sad thinking about that again. But yeah, it's life. Yeah, well, it's not life, but yeah, we move on.
And moving on to grand final day, what's your favourite part? What was your favourite part as a player about grand final day? You played in 8 grand finals. Obviously, you ended up winning 5, but what's your favourite part about grand final day?
Oh, easy question, Corey. Running out. 100,000 people in at the MCG. My first grand final I played was 110, and most of them thereafter were 100. You run out, and people say, you know, noise, people yell. 100,000 people, they've seen the songs, they've seen a group, they've seen all stuff. And then they see the team run out. That's what they came for. And they either yell or boo or scream or swear or Lord praise. And that moment, 100,000 voices just come. They come at you from every angle, from every height, because the stand's so high at the MCG. And people say noise is just, you know, travels into your ears and you hear it. It's not. With 100,000 people, it hits you. It actually smacks into you from everywhere. And whatever you do in that moment, whatever you do for next moment, first bounce, first second, first minute, first quarter of the game, makes the emotions of those 100,000 people scream for joy or curse you like no one else before. It's an amazing feeling having 100,000 voices all within roughly 100 meters of you, all focused into what you're doing. Yeah, I wish I could still play. That was a great feeling.
Would you like, so you've had 26 operations, Derm. I think you just had your 26th in February.
Yep.
What would you give? Would you go through it all again to experience the whole thing again?
I'd double the operations to experience it again. It was that much fun. It was that much fun, Corey. It was that good. I'm blessed. Yeah, I'm paying for it now physically. But gee, it was just what a ride. I loved every moment of it. Yeah, there were times you get down and you know what it's like. You lie in a hospital bed for 5 days and all your mates think, oh, we're doing the right thing going in, we'll go in and see him. So you get 5 visits over 5 days and each one lasts 10 minutes. There's a whole lot of other times just lying, looking at the ceiling and not being able to sleep on one shoulder or roll over onto that hip. Yeah, there's a lot of time in hospital, but I'd do it all again. Absolutely.
And the grand final this week, look, it'll still, I think Lee Matthews hit it on the head. It'll be a boutique grand final. That's probably the best way to sum it up because of the crowd. It's probably, as you mentioned, and when you go into that description of running out in the MCG, there is never a truer word of what the way that Derm just summed it up, because that wall of sound actually hits you. Is it the one thing that's a little bit of a shame that the players, like someone like Patrick Dangerfield and grand final day, it'll still be a grand final. They're still playing for silverware, but is it the one little bit of a downside having this boutique grand final in extreme circumstances, of course, at the Gabba?
I don't think it'll bother him at all. The result is all he'll worry about. Yep. It's one of those benefits you get, that noise from 100,000. It's one of the benefits you get as a side benefit, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're there to win the game. He'll worry about that, but it is a shame that, if he never gets back there, we're using him as a case example. If he never gets back there, he'll never experience that you called it, that's a good description, a wall of sound that hits you. And he's one of those players that the 100,000 are going to be focusing on. So, there's two combatants, him and Dusty Martin, who will be the focus of, what would have been 100,000, which will now, what have they got, 40,000 are they allowing in, something like that?
Might be up to 32,000, I think.
32, is it? Okay. So at least there's noise compared to where we've been playing. He just won't be able to comment about it and talk about that sort of moment. But I think he's got bigger fish to fry than worry about the side benefits. Yeah.
And just a quick one before I get to my last question. So who wins on Saturday and why? And your Norm Smith medalist.
Oh, I think Richmond win in terms of a machine. They got less moving parts.
Yeah.
They have less that can go wrong. If both teams play their absolute best football, it's a toss of the coin. It's a kick in it. So you've almost got to say which team is more capable of getting a couple of things wrong. And as good as Geelong are, they are probably got a few more moving parts. If the ball gets a bit slippery at night up there, with the sweat and the likes, it does get a bit greasy. They like to massage the ball around by foot and be accurate, easy, uncontested marks and the likes. Once you start getting into game plans like that, if it's a bit wet, you only need one missed opportunity, and that could be the difference. So when we say less moving parts, as good as Geelong are, you probably have to go with Richmond, whose game style is, it's almost back to under 10s, isn't it? The way they play. Sure, they squash up the ground and they squeeze up, and modern day football of repeat entries and collapsing behind it. But the way they play in general play is it's under 10s footy. Get it, kick it that way, and let the next bloke fight the hell out of it and do the best he can to get it and kick it further. So it's good strategy. It's once again, I think Damien Hardwick also a little bit like Alan Jeans probably has to be quite an emotional coach to reach them in their soul so that they give everything they've got in that type of game style. Who's my Norm Smith medal? I am staggered at how good this kid, Shy Bolton, is. So everyone's going to go for Dusty. Everyone's probably going to go for Danger. And I can totally understand that. So one out of left field, that boy is simply unbelievably good. Wouldn't surprise me if he steps into the centre and just turns the game on its head.
If Dusty did manage to win a third Norm Smith medal, where the hell would that leave him in the history of the game? Because no one's done it.
No, they haven't. And he'll do it by playing he'll win 3 out of 4 grand finals he's played in. someone like Gary Ayres played in 8 to win 2. And he's one of the greatest finals players of all time. Most times with any accolade in Australian rules football, it's an opinion based. I mean, I remember I voted for 2 Norm Smith medals since I've been retired. What have I been retired? Quarter of a century now, 25 years. And my favourite player probably of all time, Cyril Rioli. The year he won it, I was the only bloke who didn't give him the top votes. I remember writing, Sam Mitchell, Cyril Rioli, I can't split them. Who do I think's better? And they literally hand it to you and go, can you fill this in now? And I go, if I put Cyril on top and I'm the only one who puts him on top, people are going to tear shreds off me. So I put Sam Mitchell on top and then Cyril Rioli underneath it. And once again, imagine if there was only me voting on that. So it's all an opinion based. Having said that, it is the conglomeration of several people's opinions, which stands it in better stead than, a single selection. It would probably mean historically people will just automatically say he's the greatest grand final player that we've seen. But the bloke you interviewed, Lee Matthews, there's a fair chance he would have won 3 or more on grand final day had they had the award back then. In fact, I reckon they should put a panel together and get people inside a big room, a list of 6 judges to actually watch back those games and award a Norm Smith medalist accordingly.
Oh, Derm, I'm all for going back with retrospective medals. That is a great idea.
Of course you are. You've had a few good ones in there yourself.
Now, our final question, it's what all this series is named after. It's Fork in the Road. Now, what would be Dermott Brereton's fork in the road moment in his life where things could have gone one way or the other? Now, there's a few things that probably spring to mind with some of the stories that you've told today.
Yeah. I often think, with no disrespect to St Kilda, what would happen had I have ended up at St Kilda. I think I still would have made league football, but I don't think I would have been the player that I was at Hawthorn. There was a professionalism at Hawthorn that you were witness to it, and it was just accepted. That's how it was. I remember the first time I went to senior pre-season training as a 16-year-old. We were doing time trials, and somebody a little bit older than me, one of my under-19 teammates from the previous year, he was sort of coasting along through the middle, and David O'Halloran, God rest his soul, premiership player, he had finished in the group before, and he was sitting on the bench having a drink, and he was watching them as they came around for the lap times of this. I think we used to do 4K time trials. And Rubber jumped up off the bench and for 10, 15 metres screamed at one of these 17, 18-year-old boys who'd played the odd reserves game, and he screamed at him, "You're not having a go." And it was real. It was absolutely real. And to see that there was another senior player, premiership senior player, not letting a nobody, a bloke who never played, and he never played senior football. Mm. His surname was Buckley. I won't embarrass him by giving his first name. And he yelled at Bucks, "You're not having a go." And little things like that actually show you the standard that is required. I knew St Kilda players. I knew them as friends in certain circumstances. And I knew that their levels of acceptability were a lot more tolerant of the of the mediocre standards And I just wonder whether I would have succumbed to that and been one of those. Someone like Rod Owen. I remember when Rod Owen burst onto the scene, I saw a bit of myself in him. And Rod Owen was a fantastic player. He never fully realised his potential. And I wonder if that might have been me as well. Great bloke, super player. Didn't last all that long. And I think that was the environment he went into.
And all just because of where all those, with the club boundaries and all the zones,
yeah.
Own thing that you're lucky you ended up at Hawthorn. But it's absolutely brilliant to sit down with you grand final week. I think I should get a check in the mail for finding your ball as a 13-year-old. So with interest on I'm still astounded, everyone out there, that Dermott remembers the Bicentennial Classic from 1988. But as a 13-year-old, I found his ball on the right side of the fairway at Royal Melbourne, and Derms actually remembered it. So don't say concussion's a thing, but I think you can rule that out with Derm.
Yeah, and it wasn't that hard to find. I always use those fluoro-coloured little buggers.
What, people will be surprised that you're using fluoro after the boot.
Well, that's it. Yeah, Corey, just on that. This day and age, the layers wear black boots. And I look at the Olympics and every runner has fluoro shoes on, fluoro spikes, runners, joggers, whatever. And I turn around and say things like to my son, I said, I'm the first person in the world who ever wore fluoro sports shoes. And they go, oh, yeah, sure, Dad. And I go, no, I am. I remember I went out there with Ted Whitten and
I know, yeah.
Holden and Ted Whitten had them made for me. And no one had ever worn anything like that. It was so garish. Yeah, I remember Alan Jeans told me off for wearing them as well.
But wasn't the funny part that Teddy Whitten, you had these boots made by Adidas, and Teddy Whitten, the great Teddy Whitten, God rest his soul, worked for Adidas.
Yeah.
And you were going to wear them for a Victorian state game, and he basically said, no, you're not. You can wear them for Hawthorn, but you're not wearing them for Victoria.
Well, that's true. Well, I got the green ones, the fluoro green ones, and I wore them for Hawthorn. And he got me a pair of fluoro, and I mean fluoro pink. And I said, geez, even these might even be a little bit garish for me, Ted. And he went, nah, it's all right. And then I'd see him once every week or so at the football. He'd be walking in with his, he was a caller as well by then. And he'd say, you going to wear them today? I said, oh, not today, Ted. And he said, no, you got to wear them. I've talked to Jeansy. He's fine with it. There's no problems, blah, blah, blah. So this went on for about 6 weeks. We came to State of Origin game, and we were in the rooms before the game. I thought I'll wear them. Pinkle, half contrast against the navy blue outfit. So I looked at Ted and I said, Ted, he's come over to me in front of my locker, and I've pulled out the pink boots and I've said, I'm going to wear them today. And he's looked at me and he's just gone red and said, you're not wearing them playing for Victoria, no way. So I said, oh, they're good enough for Hawthorn, but not good enough for
Victoria.
For Victoria. Yeah, he was a character enough. What a great man.
No, but look, Derm, have a fantastic grand final week. It brings back great moments for us all. But on behalf of everyone that listens and watches into Fork in the Road, have a brilliant week, and we look forward to when all this is over, that we can go and have a game of golf, and I can find your fluoro ball once more.
Yeah, I'll hit it about 120 metres shorter than you, so you'll be stopping halfway on the journey to your drive, mate. But thank you very, very much. Most enjoyable.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers, buddy.